I've always believed that you can tell everything you need to know about a man by the way he treats his tools and the way he keeps his word. My name is Stan Shipman, and for 15 years I've made my living as a welder. My old man taught me the trade in a dusty shop in South Philly, back when the air was thick with the smell of coal and honest sweat. He used to tell me, "Stan, a weld is only as good as the prep work. If there's rust underneath, the whole structure is a lie." I took that to heart. I lived my life by it. I didn't need the glitz of the city or the approval of people who've never bled for a paycheck. I just wanted a simple life, a steady job, and a woman who would stand by me when the sparks stopped flying. That woman was Lucy. We were high school sweethearts, the kind of couple that everyone in our small town pointed to as the ideal. We got married 3 months after graduation. We were young, broke, and full of that dangerous kind of optimism that makes you think love is enough to pay the heating bill in January. I went straight into the trades, working 60-hour weeks, taking the double-time shifts in the shipyards and the dangerous underwater contracts that most men turn down. I did it all for her. I was the one who sat at the kitchen table every month, moving numbers around so I could pay for her tuition. I put Lucy through 4 years of college and then 3 years of law school. I didn't care that I smelled like ozone and grease every night when I came home. I didn't care that my back ached and my eyes were perpetually red from the arc light. I was proud of her. When she got that job as a paralegal at McMaster and Frederick's downtown, I felt like we had made it. I bought her a brand new Toyota so she'd look the part, while I kept driving my beat-up Ford with 200,000 miles on the odometer. I thought I was building a fortress for our future. I didn't realize I was just providing the materials for her to build a wall between us. The change was subtle at first. A new haircut. Then a new wardrobe of suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage. Then came the firm nights. It started with one Thursday a month, then every Thursday, then Friday nights. Our only real time together became networking opportunities. Lucy started talking differently too. She used words like optics, billable hours, and professional trajectory. When I try to talk about my day, maybe a difficult pipe fit or a new contract, she'd just nod distractedly, her eyes glued to her work phone. "You wouldn't understand, Stan," she'd say, her voice dripping with a cold, new kind of condescension. "It's a different world downtown. People judge you by who you know and how you present yourself. It's not like the shop." The real alarm bells started ringing when she stopped wearing her wedding ring. She claimed she was moving too fast at the office, and was afraid the diamond would snag on the files or get lost in the ladies' room. I'm a welder, not a fool. I know when a joint is about to snap. I did something I'm not proud of. I installed a tracker on her phone. I told myself it was for her safety, but deep down, I knew I was looking for the rust underneath the paint. That Friday, she told me she'd be in the office until midnight working on a discovery motion. The tracker put her at a high-end lounge called the Gilded Cage across town. I didn't even wash the grease off my face. I drove straight there in my work clothes, feeling like a ghost in a room full of people who spent more on a bottle of wine than I did on a set of tires. I saw her immediately. She was sitting in a velvet booth, her head thrown back in a laugh I hadn't heard in years. She wasn't alone. She was leaning into a guy named Jake, a senior associate at her firm with a jawline like a Greek statue and hands that had never known a callus. I walked up to the table, the smell of the shipyard clinging to my jacket like a badge of shame in that polished room. "Working hard on that motion, Lucy?" I asked. My voice was low, vibrating with a rage I was struggling to keep contained. The color drained from her face. Jake didn't even flinch. He just looked at my dirty jeans and smirked. "And you must be the husband. The technician, right?" He stood up and offered his hand. It was a power move, a man of the world, greeting a peasant. He squeezed hard, trying to show off. I let him. Then I leaned in and returned the favor. I spent my days gripping heavy steel. Jake spent his gripping a fountain pen. I squeezed until I felt the bones in his hands start to grind together. I watched the smirk vanish, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated pain. He didn't say another word as he sank back into the booth, nursing his crushed pride. "Get in the car, Lucy," I said. "You're embarrassing me, Stan," she hissed as we walked out. Mark and Marie were just about to join us. "These are the partners. You're ruining my career." "I'm ruining your career? I paid for your career," I shouted back in the parking lot. We fought all the way home. She swore it was innocent, just building rapport. She promised to stop the Friday outings. For a month she was the perfect wife again. She stayed home, cooked dinner, and even started talking about having a baby. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that the weld could be saved. Then came the night that broke everything. I came home on a Friday to a house lit only by candles. The table was set with our best china. Lucy was wearing a dress that was more of a suggestion than a garment, short, backless, and expensive. She looked like a dream, but her eyes were darting toward the hallway. "I wanted to apologize for everything, Stan," she whispered, handing me a glass of wine. "I realize that you're the most important thing to me. Let's just have a quiet night. Just us." I drank the wine. Within 10 minutes the room started to tilt. My head felt like it was filled with cotton. I tried to stand to ask her what she'd put in the glass, but my legs didn't belong to me anymore. I collapsed onto the floor, the last thing I saw being the shadow of another person entering the room. When I came to, the world was a blur of pain and cold. I was in our master bedroom, but I wasn't in the bed. I was stripped to my underwear and zip-tied to a heavy oak chair. My wrists were pulled tight behind my back, the plastic cutting into my skin. Then I felt the cold metal around my waist, a cage that Lucy had bought to humiliate me. The door opened. Lucy walked in, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. Behind her was Marie Compton, her mentor from the firm, and Jake. They were carrying glasses of scotch and a video camera. "Why, Lucy?" I croaked, my tongue feeling twice its usual size. "Because you're an anchor, Stan," Marie said, stepping forward. She was a shark in a designer suit, a woman who viewed people as assets or liabilities. "Lucy has potential. She could be a partner. But she's tethered to a man who smells like a factory. She needs to broaden her horizons, and you need to see exactly where you stand in the new hierarchy." Marie gagged me with a piece of heavy tape. "Stay quiet. This is a learning experience." For the next 2 hours, I was forced to watch a nightmare play out in front of my eyes. Jake and another man from the office treated my bedroom like a playground, and Lucy went along with all of it. She looked at me while she did it, a twisted smile on her face as if she were finally free. They mocked my salary, they mocked my simple life, and then, at the end, they did something so degrading, so subhuman, that it stripped away every ounce of love I had ever felt for that woman. They treated me like a fire hydrant, laughing as they humiliated me, while Marie filmed the whole thing for leverage. "If you ever go to the cops, Stan," Marie whispered in my ear, her breath smelling of expensive whiskey, "this video goes to your boss, your parents, your whole little town. You'll be the joke of the county." They left me there, tied up and broken. It was Lucy who eventually cut the ties, her face now devoid of any emotion. "I'm sorry it had to be this way, Stan," she said, her voice flat. "But Marie is right. We're just moving in different directions." I didn't say a word. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just went into a cold, hard place deep inside myself. I waited until she went into the bathroom to shower, then I grabbed my clothes, my phone, and this was her mistake, the phone she'd left on the nightstand. I called 911. The police arrived in force. Lucy tried to play the victim, crying that it was a bedroom game gone wrong, but the bruises on my face from where Jake had hit me and the drug screens at the hospital told a different story. They took her away in handcuffs, her screams echoing down the hallway of the apartment building we'd lived in for 3 years. But the nightmare wasn't over. Linda Calloway, the assistant DA, told me the truth. McMaster and Fredericks wasn't just a law firm. It was a front for a massive racketeering and extortion ring. They used people like Lucy to get close to assets, and they used people like me to keep them in line. A day later, a manila envelope appeared at my door. Inside were photos of a man, a former employee's husband, who had accidentally fallen off a balcony after trying to sue the firm. There was a note, "Back off, welder. You're out of your league." I knew I couldn't stay. My apartment was a crime scene, my marriage was a lie, and the people hunting me had more money than I could ever imagine. I packed my welding rig, some basic tools, and headed for the only place I knew where the law was written in lead and loyalty. I drove through the night, the I-95 blurring into a tunnel of darkness. I headed for the hills of Pennsylvania, toward the Brolin property. Dave Brolin had been my father's best friend. He was a man who lived by the old code, a man who didn't care about optics or billable hours. I pulled into his driveway at 3 a.m. The headlights of my truck cut through the mountain mist, revealing a tall, fit woman standing on the porch with a rifle held loosely at her side. It was Beverly, Dave's sister. The last time I'd seen her, she was a quiet girl with pigtails. Now she looked like someone who knew exactly how to handle a threat. "Stan?" she called out, her voice clear and strong. I stepped out of the truck, my face swollen, my hands shaking from the sheer exhaustion of the last 48 hours. "I've got a situation, Bev," I said. She didn't ask questions. She just saw the state of me and nodded toward the door. "Come inside. Dave's in the shop. We've got high ground here, Stan. And we don't like uninvited guests." I walked into that house and for the first time in a week I felt like I could breathe. I didn't know then that the firm was already tracking my truck. I didn't know that Lucy and her mentors were coming for me. But as I looked at Beverly, I knew one thing for certain. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. And this time, I wasn't just a technician. I was a man with nothing left to lose. I woke up the next morning at Dave's place to the smell of wood smoke and strong coffee. For a split second I forgot where I was. I expected to see the white walls of my apartment in Philly, to hear the sound of Lucy's hair dryer. Then I tried to move my arm and the sharp sting of the zip tie burns on my wrists brought the reality crashing back. I wasn't at home. I didn't have a home anymore. I was a man on the run, hiding in the mountains with a target on my back. I walked downstairs and found Beverly in the kitchen. She was dressed in a simple t-shirt and work shorts, her blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She didn't look like the girls Lucy hung out with, the ones who spent hours on their makeup just to go to the grocery store. Beverly looked solid. Real. Like someone who could survive a storm without checking her reflection in a window. "Morning, Stan," she said, sliding a plate of eggs and thick-cut venison bacon in front of me. "Dave's out back in the shop. He's already started prepping a few things. We don't like being caught off guard up here." I sat down and started to eat, but my mind was miles away. I was thinking about the manila envelope and the photos of the dead man. I was thinking about the smirk on Jake's face. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wedding ring. It felt heavy like a piece of lead. I set it on the kitchen table and Beverly looked at it for a long moment. "You'm done with it?" she asked softly. "I'm done with everything that involves that woman," I replied. "The weld is broken beyond repair, Bev. I'm just waiting for the wreckage to settle." Beverly sat down across from me, her eyes locked onto mine. "You were always too good for her, Stan. Even when we were kids, I saw how you worked, how you cared. You built her a pedestal and she used it to look down on you. But you're here now. And in these woods, downtown influence doesn't mean a damn thing." Later that morning, I used Dave's landline to call Linda Calloway. Her voice was frantic when she picked up. "Stan, where are you?" "The judge. I don't know how else to say this, but they got out. Marie, Jake, and Lucy. They were released on a minimal bond this morning. The firm pulled some strings with a local judge we've been investigating for months. They're free, Stan. And they're looking for you." "I figured," I said, my voice cold. "They already sent a message to my door before I left. Linda, I think they're at my parents' house. I need you to get agents over there now." "I'm on it," she promised. "But Stan, stay put. Don't move. We're moving the feds in, but it's going to be a few hours." I hung up the phone and looked at Dave, who was standing in the doorway, cleaning a heavy-duty rifle. He'd heard everything. "They're coming, aren't they?" Dave asked. "Yeah. And they're not coming to talk." The afternoon passed in a tense, quiet crawl. Dave and I moved my truck into the barn and covered it with a tarp. We spent the hours checking the perimeter of the property. Dave had sensors set up along the main trail, old-school stuff that buzzed a receiver in the kitchen. Beverly, meanwhile, was a revelation. She didn't panic. She didn't cry. She just quietly loaded a flintlock rifle and checked her sights. "You know how to use that?" I asked, watching her handle the long barrel. "Stan, I've been hunting since I could walk," she said with a small, dangerous smile. "I can hit a squirrel's eye at 50 yards with this. A lawyer in a suit shouldn't be too hard to find." Around 4 p.m. the receiver in the kitchen started to buzz. "Someone's on the lower trail," Dave said, his voice dropping an octave. "One vehicle. SUV. Black." "That's them," I said. My heart started to hammer against my ribs, but it wasn't fear. It was a cold, simmering anticipation. Dave handed me a sidearm. "Stay in the shop. Let them think you're alone. Bev, get to the deer stand by the creek. Don't fire unless you have to, but if you do, don't miss." I went into the shop, the familiar smell of metal and oil grounding me. I didn't turn on the lights. I just waited. 10 minutes later, I heard the crunch of gravel and the slam of car doors. "Stan. Come out, Stan. We know you're in there." It was Jake. His voice was high and arrogant, still filled with that king-of-the-world energy. I stepped out of the shop and into the yard. Jake was standing there, holding a pistol like he'd seen it done in a movie. Behind him stood Marie, looking bored, and Lucy. Lucy looked different. The sweet high school sweetheart was gone. Her eyes were hard, filled with a desperate kind of hatred. "You really think you could run?" Lucy spat. "You stole my phone, Stan. You have things that don't belong to you. Give it back and maybe we can talk about a settlement." "The only thing I'm giving you, Lucy, is a front row seat to the end of your career," I said. "The feds are already at the firm. Your little mentors are being raided as we speak. Marie laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. You're a welder, Stan. You think you can take down a firm like ours? We own the judges. We own the police. You're just a loose end that needs to be tied off. Jake stepped forward, raising the gun. Enough talk. I owe you for my hand, you piece of trash. Turn around. Kneel. I didn't move. I looked Jake right in the eye. You really shouldn't have come here, Jake. You're out of your league. Kneel, he screamed, his face turning red. Crack. The sound echoed through the valley like a lightning strike. Jake didn't even have time to scream. A heavy lead ball from Beverly's flintlock caught him right in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun flying into the dirt. He hit the ground, howling in agony. Marie panicked, reaching into her purse, but another shot rang out, this one from Dave's position near the house, hitting the ground right between her feet. Drop it. Dave roared, stepping out from behind a woodpile with his rifle leveled. Drop it or the next one goes through your teeth. Marie dropped her bag, her hands shaking. Lucy fell to her knees, her face pale as a sheet. She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror, the same terror I'd felt when I was tied to that chair. Stan, please, she begged. It was Marie. She made me do it. I still love you. I walked over to her, looking down at the woman I'd spent 7 years of my life trying to protect. I felt nothing. No anger, no love, just a profound sense of relief that the lie was finally over. You never loved me, Lucy, I said quietly. You loved the security I gave you while you looked for something better. While you found it, welcome to the bottom. The police and federal agents arrived 20 minutes later. Linda Calloway was with them. They found Jake bleeding out in the dirt and Marie trying to bribe a deputy while they cuffed her. They found the phone I'd taken from Lucy, which contained months of encrypted messages detailing every illegal deal the firm had ever made. It was this smoking gun they needed to bring the whole house down. The next 6 months were a whirlwind of depositions and court dates. The McMaster and Frederick firm didn't just close, it imploded. The partners were hit with RICO charges, extortion, and several counts related to the suspicious ends of former employees. Marie and Jake were sentenced to 25 years each. Lucy, for her role in the assault and her cooperation with the firm's criminal activities, got 15. I didn't go to her sentencing. I didn't need to. I had already moved on. I stayed in the mountains. I didn't go back to Philly. There was nothing there for me but ghosts and bad welts. I took the money from the settlement. Bernice Goodwin, the lawyer Linda recommended, had absolutely gutted Lucy's remaining assets and the firm's insurance, and I bought a stake in Dave's business. We renamed it D&S Custom Fabrications. We don't do shipyards or underwater contracts anymore. We do high-end custom work, gates, furniture, structural art. It's honest work, and the people we work for actually know the value of a man's hands. And then there's Beverly. Turns out Dave was right. She had been waiting for me to wake up for a long time. We didn't rush into anything, I had a lot of healing to do, but she was there every step of the way. She didn't need a pedestal. She stood right beside me in the shop, helping me grind the seams and polish the finished products. One evening, after a long day of work, we were sitting on the porch watching the sun dip below the ridge. The air was cool, smelling of pine and the faint scent of ozone from the shop. You thinking about her? Beverly asked, leaning her head on my shoulder. No, I said, and I meant it. I was thinking about the shop. I think we need a bigger plasma cutter if we're going to handle that new contract. Beverly laughed and kissed my cheek. Always thinking about the work, Stan? It's the only thing that doesn't lie to you, Bev, I said, pulling her close. A good weld stays true. Just like a good woman. I looked down at my hand. There was a new ring there, a simple band we'd made ourselves in the shop. It wasn't flashy. It didn't cost a fortune. But the metal was pure, the bond was strong, and for the first time in my life, I knew that this structure would hold. Lucy and Marie are probably still broadening their horizons in a state penitentiary somewhere, cleaning floors and following orders. Me, I've got the high ground. I've got a partner who knows how to handle a rifle. And I've finally got a life that's built to last. They say that when you're welding, the brightest part of the arc is the most dangerous. If you stare directly at it without protection, it'll blind you before you even know you're hurt. For 7 years, that was my life with Lucy. She was a blinding light, a distraction of high-end dinners, expensive cars, and a perfect marriage that kept me from seeing the rot underneath. But now the mask was gone. The flash had faded, and I was seeing the world with the cold, hard clarity of a man who had survived the fire. The months following the arrests weren't the happily ever after you see in movies. It was a slow, agonizing grind. I stayed at Dave's place, buried in work. Every morning I was in the shop by 5 a.m., the cold mountain air hitting my lungs as I prepped the day's steel. I worked until my muscles screamed, until the vibration of the grinder was all I could feel in my bones. I didn't want to think. I didn't want to remember the look on Lucy's face or the smell of Jake's cologne. I just wanted to build. Beverly was the one who kept me tethered to the real world. She wasn't like the women I'd known in Philly. She didn't need constant validation or a designer bag to feel important. She'd come out to the shop around noon with a thermos of coffee and a sandwich, sitting on an overturned crate and just watching me work. She didn't push me to talk. She just existed in my space, a calm, steady presence that slowly started to fill the holes the firm had torn in my soul. "You're overgrinding that seam, Stan," she said one Tuesday, her voice cutting through the noise of the shop. I stopped, the sparks fading into the shadows. I looked down at the steel. She was right. I was trying to grind away the memory of the past, but all I was doing was weakening the metal. "Sometimes you just have to let the weld stand as it is," she said softly. "It's not perfect, but it's strong. That's what matters." While I was rebuilding my sanity, the city of Philadelphia was tearing itself apart. The fall of McMaster and Frederick was the biggest scandal the state had seen in decades. It wasn't just a law firm, it was a parasite. They had their hands in everything: construction contracts, city planning, even the local judiciary. Linda Calloway and the feds were working around the clock, flipping junior associates and secretaries who had been waiting for years for a chance to escape the firm's shadow. The trial was a circus. I had to go back to Philly for my testimony. Walking into that courtroom felt like walking back into a cage, but this time I was the one with the key. I wore my best suit, the only one I owned, bought for a wedding years ago, but I refused to cover the scars on my wrists. I wanted the jury to see what broadening horizons really looked like. Marie Compton sat at the defense table like she was still the queen of the city. Even in her orange jumpsuit, she looked down her nose at everyone. Jake was there too, his shoulder in a heavy brace from Beverly's lead ball. He looked diminished, a shell of the alpha he pretended to be. And then there was Lucy. She wouldn't look at me. She sat huddled between her lawyers, her hair unwashed, her face pale. The glamour had been stripped away, revealing the terrified, hollow shell underneath. When it was my turn to take the stand, the defense attorney tried to tear me apart. "Mr. Shipman," he began, pacing the floor like a predator, "is it not true that you have a history of manual labor? A history of, let's call it, rough interactions? Isn't it true that you were jealous of your wife's success and that this entire kidnapping was a staged event to ruin her career?" I didn't lose my temper. I looked at the jury, 12 regular people, folks who worked for a living, folks who knew the value of a dollar. "I spent 7 years working 60-hour weeks to pay for that woman's career," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. "I've worked in freezing water and burning factories so she could have a life of comfort. I didn't want her career. I wanted my wife. But she didn't want a husband. She wanted a sponsor for her lifestyle, and when she was done with me, she and her friends decided to play with me like I wasn't even human. You want to talk about jealousy? I'm not jealous of people who have to tie a man to a chair to feel powerful." Then they played the video. The courtroom went dead silent. The sounds of their laughter, the mockery of my life, the sheer cold-blooded humiliation. It was all there. I watched the jurors' faces. Some looked away in disgust. Others glared at the defense table with a hatred that was palpable. Lucy started to sob, a loud, ugly sound that filled the room. Marie just stared at the screen, her face a mask of cold arrogance until the very end. The verdict didn't take long. Racketeering, conspiracy, aggravated assault, kidnapping, and a dozen other charges I couldn't even keep track of. Marie and the senior partners were handed life sentences. They were sent to a federal facility where their influence bought them nothing but a longer wait in the lunch line. Jake got 30 years. Because of his previous clean record, he thought he'd get off light, but the judge was a man who had lost a brother to a similar accident the firm had staged years ago. Lucy was sentenced to 15 years. As she was being led out of the courtroom in chains, she finally looked at me. She mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." I didn't mouth anything back. I just turned my back on her and walked out the heavy oak doors, into the Philadelphia sun. I was done. The financial settlement was massive. Bernice Goodwin, the divorce attorney Linda had set me up with, was a shark in her own right. She didn't just want a divorce, she wanted a total liquidation. She sued the firm's insurance, she sued the estates of the partners, and she clawed back every cent I had ever spent on Lucy's education and lifestyle. By the time it was over, I was sitting on more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. But I didn't want a mansion in the suburbs. I didn't want a sports car. I went back to the mountains. I sat Dave and Beverly down in their living room and laid a stack of papers on the table. I'm buying the lot on the south side of town, I told them. The old manufacturing plant. And I want us to be partners. 50-50ths. We build the shop we've always talked about. DNS Custom Fabrications. No more shipyards, Dave. We do high-end, custom work. We hire the best guys in the county and pay them what they're worth. Dave looked at the numbers and then at me. You're serious, aren't you? Dead serious. I spent my life building things that belong to other people. It's time I built something that belongs to us. The next year was a blur of construction and growth. We turned that old plant into a fortress of industry. We had the best CNC machines, the most advanced welding bays, and a climate-controlled design studio where Beverly could work her magic. She wasn't just managing the business, she was the heart of it. She had an eye for design that put Lucy's top-tier agency friends to shame. As the business grew, so did we. I finally realized that my love for Lucy hadn't been love at all, it was a sense of duty. With Beverly it was different. It was easy. There were no games, no networking secrets, no feeling like I had to apologize for the grease under my fingernails. I proposed to her on the floor of the new shop, right in the middle of a massive art installation we were building for a museum in New York. I didn't have a fancy speech. I just pulled a ring out of my pocket, a band of aerospace-grade titanium I'd machined myself, inlaid with a single, perfect diamond. I don't have a pedestal for you, Bev, I said. Just a seat next to me. You want to build a life. She didn't even say yes. She just grabbed my collar and kissed me until my head spun. We got married on a Saturday in October. The leaves were turning gold and red, matching the sparks that flew in the shop. We didn't invite anyone from Philly. We invited the guys from the shop, our parents, and the neighbors who had helped us clear the land. Dave stood as my best man, grinning from ear to ear. To my sister and my brother, Dave said, raising a glass of high-end bourbon. May your welds never crack and may your fire never go out. A few months after the wedding, a letter arrived at our new house. It was from the prison. It was a thick envelope filled with pages of Lucy's neat, cursive handwriting. She talked about how unfair the prison conditions were. She talked about how the other women didn't understand her. She asked if I could send money for a better mattress and proper skincare. She even had the nerve to suggest that if I helped her get an early release, we could start over with the money I'd made. I read the first page sitting on my back porch looking out over the valley. I watched as Beverly walked out from the garden, her hands covered in soil, a bright smile on her face as she saw me. She looked happy. She looked whole. I didn't read the rest of the letter. I didn't feel anger and I didn't feel pity. I just felt nothing. Lucy was a ghost, a remnant of a man I didn't recognize anymore. I walked over to our outdoor fire pit, tossed the letter into the glowing embers, and watched as the paper curled and turned to black ash. What was that? Beverly asked, wiping her hands on her jeans as she sat next to me. Just some scrap, I said, pulling her close and kissing the top of her head. Nothing worth keeping. The firm was dead. The lawyers were in cages. And the welder? The welder was finally home. I've spent 15 years learning how to fuse two pieces of metal so they can never be pulled apart. It took me a long time to learn that the strongest bonds aren't made with heat and pressure. They're made with truth, loyalty, and a woman who knows exactly how to hold the torch. As I looked out at the mountains, I knew one thing for certain. This weld was perfect. This structure was solid. And this time, there was no rust underneath. I picked up my tools, grabbed Beverly's hand, and walked back inside. We had work to do. We had a legacy to build. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what I was building it for.